to sin. We don't have an opportunity in this life to take it for granted. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Romans 6 verse 1. So he's saying, let no man despise thy youth, but be an example of the believers. If I wanted a sample of the Christians at Randolph, I should be able to go to the young people and say, here's a good sample. Or the middle-aged and say, well, there's a good sample. Or to those who are very old, go to those and say, now there's a good sample of what a Christian should be. We should be the right kind of example in word. This is about the words we say, our speech. There are 12 verses in James chapter 3 that talks about our speech. And he says, the tongue is a little member, and it boasts great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members. It setteth on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell. He says, of every beast and a bird and a serpent and things of the sea, they've been tamed and have been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. Praising God one moment, cursing man the next moment. Man made in the image of God. That doesn't make sense. We have to have consistency of word, consistency of language. We can't be cursing one moment, praising God the next. We've got to get our words under the control of our mind and our faith. What kind of words would Jesus use? Those are the kind of words we would use if we are examples in word or speech. The next thing he says is conduct or behavior. Our entire conduct is important. I didn't mind getting grades in the things that we had in school. School wasn't so hard for me in first, second, third grade. Those I enjoyed the little classes we had. But I did have this thing I didn't understand that was called conduct. I didn't get good grades in conduct. That's serious. I didn't get good grades in conduct, and I didn't know how to get my grade to come up. My dad would sign my report card and say, son, you got to work on your conduct. I said, well, I don't even know where that class is. I didn't understand. But conduct is the way we behave. And I didn't understand when the teacher said, sit down and close your mouth, but that's what that meant. But anyway, we get a grade in conduct from God. Children have to learn how to behave themselves. That's important. That's why teachers are trying to instill that. But we need to always grade our conduct, how we're conducting our lives, our behavior. Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So the words we use, the way we conduct our life, the things we do, the way we behave, this betrays whether we are a Christian or not. The next thing he says is love. Love. Love is a many-splendored thing, they say. What do we mean by love? Well, I love ice cream, I love puppies, I love grandmother, I love my mother, I love the Bible, I love the Lord. We use that word so much. Love my wife. We use that word so much. What do we mean by it? Well, in English, we get frustrated because we have one word to love all those things. But in the Greek language, they have a word to love your brother, another word to love your sweetheart, another word to love God, and another word to love your grandfather or your grandson. And these words differentiate what is meant by I love. Well, what is the word here? The word here is the highest form of love. It's the word, you've probably heard it, agape. Agape is love in action. It's not philosophical love. It's not a feeling. It is love that moves you to do something. I don't know if you saw it. I saw it later. Someone pointed it out, but it was a commercial that came on during the Super Bowl, and they reran this. They're still running it. It's for New York Life. But this commercial talks about 4 Greek words for love. And it emphasizes the love that friends have for each other, the love that a grandfather, grandson, or child might have, romantic love, and then it identifies agape love. And they do a great job of it because they say agape is love in action. And they're right about that. It is. It's the kind of love that they have in nursing homes when they're changing the bed for someone that can't change their own bed. Or the love a mother has for a child, changing his diaper, being up with it at night, or the father doing that. Or loving the unlovely. There's so many people that are just unlovely, but they need love. They need agape. Jesus demonstrated this in John chapter 8, verses 1 to 13, when he took a towel, girded himself, and washed the disciples' feet. And he said, as I've done for you, do to one another. They were to do as he had done. Now what did Jesus do? He, the greatest among them, took a towel, girded himself, and washed the disciples' feet. The king washing the feet of the subject. And they got to Peter, Jesus got to Peter, and Peter said, you're not going to wash my feet. He said, Peter, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part with me. He said, okay, wash me all over. He didn't understand, and I think a lot of people don't understand what Jesus meant about washing feet. One of our former governors, he's dead now, but one of the governors of Alabama made the news because he went to a local church and humbled himself and washed feet in a foot washing service. And these were people that probably had very clean feet compared to disciples' feet. You see, we wear socks and shoes today. They wore sandals and walked in the same streets where the camels and the donkeys and the animals walked. To wash feet back then was important because you go into a house that probably had a dirt floor, swept, and they laid down on the floor to eat. And some people had feet in their face. And you would want those feet to be clean before you eat. And so the lowliest slave among all of them would wash the feet of everybody else. Of course, he was a nobody. Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, demonstrating that the greatest in his kingdom is the servant of all. And that means that we should be willing to take a towel and wash feet if that's the need. Seldom is that the need in a worship service. I don't see why we need to have a public worship service and involve foot washing. But in a nursing home, that's something probably needs to be done quite often. And probably not a pleasant task, but something that needs to be done. Jesus said it's not about foot washing, it's about meeting needs. Not being too good to serve someone else. So that's what it's talking about there in love, agape love, doing the best for the other. And then in spirit, what does it mean in spirit? We ought to have the spirit Christ had. Christ had a compassionate spirit. He wept over cities that weren't living right, like Jerusalem. And Jesus was moved with compassion when he saw people that needed God and that needed help. And we should have the spirit of Christ. In faith, faith is the entire belief system and practice of a Christian. And we ought to be examples of what we believe. And it shows in our practice. He's already touched on that. But this is a summary word in faith. We share a common faith. And we ought to be examples of that faith. Not just say that we believe, but put our belief into practice. The demons believe in God, but they don't do well. James said, James 2:19, he said, thou believest in God, thou doest well. Even the demons believe and tremble But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead, being alone? He's saying that the devils, they're not atheists. The demons, there's only one devil, many demons. But the demons, they believe in God, but they don't obey God. They're rebels. Whereas we are to do well when we believe in God. It moves us to obey God. So in faith, in purity, and this is what he ends with, because young people need to be pure. I don't know of a greater challenge than there's ever been for young people to remain pure. They are bombarded from all sides with media and with opportunities for impurity. I know Jesus was tempted in all points as we are, and yet he remained without sin. He sets the perfect example, Hebrews 4:15-16. But young people have an opportunity to show and demonstrate what it is to be a Christian, and that involves purity. And he tells Timothy, let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers. All believers should practice purity. Not just young people, but all people, all Christians, need to have purity. This word purity in the Greek is from the same words that we get the word holy, sacred, saint. It has to do with that which is pure, that which is associated with God. And Paul tells Timothy in these books that he writes to them to look at the older women as mothers, the younger women as sisters in all purity. You have to have a clean heart, mind. And we have to have this purity in our thoughts and in our actions as Christians. We're going to stand out if we follow this little pattern here, this little prescription. You go to work with clean speech, with good conduct, with a loving heart, where your love moves you to action, with the Spirit of Christ, with the faith of Christ demonstrated in your life and in purity, you're not going to be like those you're around. You're going to stand out as a saint. And you will be an example, Paul says, of the believers or to the believers. And so this is what we're challenged to be, and we're not to forget this. The word example comes from a Greek word. There are two Greek words, and they're both translated example in English. But here it's different from 1 Peter 2:21, where Christ left us an example that we should follow in his steps. That word example in 1 Peter is a compound Greek word, hupo, and it looks like the word grammar, or graphe, but it literally means to underwrite. Hupo meaning under, graphe to write. And what does that mean? Well, I had a problem when I first started